All right, we are live, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Lake County. I'm your host, David Rich. Have a very special guest on today, a very recurring guest on a multitude of my shows. I believe this is the second time you've been on this one. You were on my Green Party show multitude of times, for sure. But now this is, I'm kind of flying solo here on this one. It's more specific and directed towards a more localized community, which I like that. So thanks for coming on, Sid Smith. And Sid, why don't you tell us about this thing you started however many years ago? How to enjoy the end of the world and why? Like, what was it about?
So I've taken an interest in civilizational collapse for at least 20 years, and I joined the Green Party in before 2016, but I was really active in 2016, helping out with the Stein campaign. Brought Jill Stein to Virginia a couple of times and
nice.
Set up venues for her and so on. And those two things kind of seem to mesh quite a bit because none of the other political parties were talking about the issues that lead to collapse. They weren't talking about ecological overshoot. They weren't talking seriously about energy depletion or environmental collapse. And so in 2017, I was invited to give a talk at Virginia Tech by the Green Party student organization there. And so I put together a talk called Humanity, the Final Chapter, which, was a little bit
a bit of a daunting, foreboding title there.
It was fun to do, and you can find it on YouTube. And so that was successful. So about a year and a half later, they invited me back, and I gave a second talk, which I decided to title How to Enjoy the End of the World. And that video on YouTube, to my surprise, went viral. And so suddenly I had thousands of people watching the video and writing to me and asking me questions and so on and so forth. So I, wanted to answer those questions and to, because a lot of the questions that I got were, pretty deeply personally concerning, like, what's going to happen to me, and should I have children, and how should I feel about this, and despair, and all kinds of things. So that's what got me thinking that I should probably go ahead and unpack that hour-long presentation into more accessible, more digestible chunks for people and address some of those concerns at the same time. And that led to my making the video series, How to Enjoy the End of the World, which again is on YouTube. I made a prologue, which was why you shouldn't let collapse get you down. And that remains one of the most popular videos. And it did what I wanted it to do, as a number of, hundreds of people have told me that really helped them feel less negative, less despair over what we were talking about. So that was very nice that I was able to do that. And then the idea was to continue with a series of videos on all the different collapse-related topics. And I did that up through chapter 5. And then some personal issues in my own life caused me to have to refactor all my priorities. And I haven't been able to continue with new videos yet. But I have by no means given up on the project. And in fact, I think about it all the time. I have plans made. And the series will be coming back, and there will be a lot of new videos, including the next one, which will be on the economic system. It's titled Capitalism, Socialism, and the Real Economy, which is probably going to be pretty timely given what's about to happen to the economy. So it definitely is coming back. But as I say, life happens, and sometimes you have to refactor your priorities. And one of the things I had to do was to stop making videos, at least for the time being. But it's definitely coming back. The series, How to Enjoy the End of the World, it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. The world isn't actually ending, something I make clear in the videos, at least probably not. I mean, you never know for sure. But ask the dinosaurs. But probably not. And so what it really is about the mechanics of civilizational collapse as it relates to our lives, because we are living through a civilizational collapse. And it really helps to be able to try to understand what's going on and how to feel about it in a way so that we can continue to live full and satisfying lives.
Yeah. No, that's a noble process. I'm probably a program that you instantiated. But I mean, yeah, no, I just recently like looked at some of your videos again, the ones that you were on this show, and then like your actual the ones that you post on YouTube. No, it's fascinating stuff, and that's. So I promoted this show tonight to every people I haven't like texted in like years. I'm like, dude, you gotta watch this. And I got a lot of like, oh, this is one person said this sounds good. I'm like, it's both good and upsetting. Let's not over. Right. Okay, like how do we define good?
It's a dark topic, but we'll say nice things about it.
Okay, right, exactly. And real quick, I want to give it a shout out to my Aunt Terry Schomer, who's watching from San Diego. Hello, Aunt Terry. How are you? Thank you for joining. Yeah, so well, let's get into it then. Things are looking more bleak and grim than the last time I talked to you. So do you have a starting point? Or you want me to kind of just ask questions that I have?
Well, I'll just say in response to what you just said, you're right. Things are looking pretty anxiety causing. I think 2026 is going to be a year of panics. What's happened now with what really should be thought of as World War III is going to have third and fourth order effects that are incalculable, and we can talk about that a little bit. And so as the year progresses, it's impossible to say exactly what's going to happen, but it seems pretty clear that we're in for a pretty rough ride this year. And there are a number of ways that could turn out that people should be thinking about resilience and how to prepare. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, the more obvious part of being at war with a nation like Iran and stuff in the Middle East is a very, tumultuous idea at best, and very problematic and trepidatious, as you said. I mean, a lot of anxiety there. But
it's an extremely dangerous situation.
It's a very dangerous.
That's the hardest part because not only have you got someone in the White House who's incompetent and probably left to his own devices would reach for nuclear weapons, but you've got a rogue nation in Israel, which, if pushed to the wall, is also likely to reach for nuclear weapons, and you just can't know what's going to happen in consequence if that occurs.
Oh man!
So, lots of reasons for anxiety. Just apart from the extraordinary disruption to the world's energy supply, its fertilizer supply, its critical gases supply like helium. And all of these things are going to have third and fourth and fifth order effects that we just can't see right now, but which are likely to be extremely disruptive.
Would you be able to speculate on what those might be? I mean, obviously we don't know, like you said, like any legit.
Well, I mean, it's pretty easy to see what the first and second order effects are going to be.
Okay.
And let me unpack that a bit. So, if energy doesn't come, then gas prices are going to go up. That's a first order effect or a second order effect. But there are third and fourth order effects that are much, much harder to predict. And let me give you an example. If you think back to the COVID crisis, when COVID hit and the response to it on the part of governments was to do things to try to minimize transmission, which, you can argue one way or the other, but it wasn't an irrational choice to make.
Right.
And one of the ways that happened was everybody suddenly started working from home. Now, one of the things that people didn't think about was that when people are at work, that's where they shit. And if they're not going to work anymore, they're not using the toilet paper there anymore. They're using the toilet paper at home. And the supply chain for toilet paper was geared toward millions of people using those great big industrial rolls, right, in the commercial business bathrooms and not the packs of little rolls that we put in our bathroom. And the consequence was suddenly all the toilet paper was gone. And it's not because people were hoarding, right? I heard a lot of that. People would say, well, if people would just stop hoarding, it would be fine. They weren't hoarding. They were just doing the natural thing. They were like, oh, I'm out of toilet paper at home. I better go buy some. Why were they out of toilet paper at home? Because they'd been home and not
more frequently than
right?
they used to be. Mm-hmm.
But suddenly it's a crisis. Nobody can get toilet paper. Now, that's a good example of a third or fourth order effect that nobody predicted.
Right.
Somebody who really thought about it deeply might have predicted it, but it's just one of 1,000 or 2,000 possible things that can be affected. And when you have a very complex, deeply integrated economic system with supply chains and just-in-time stocking and all these kinds of things, a disruption in one area can cascade into other areas and cause unpredictable problems that you just didn't know about. So we've got a situation now where even if the Hormuz Strait opened tomorrow, they've shut in so much energy supply and fertilizer supply and things like sulfuric acid and helium and other important industrial feedstocks that's going to ripple through the economy over the course of the next year, and we can't know right now what's going to happen in consequence. And if you've been paying attention the last day or two, it doesn't look like the Hormuz Strait's going to open anytime soon, which means in a few weeks, well, already they're running out of liquid petroleum gas, what we call propane. They're running out of that all over Asia. They're running out of diesel. They're running out of jet fuel. Gasoline is going through the roof. Asia's getting hit very hard, right? Korea, Singapore, Japan, they're already in crisis. In about 4 weeks, that same crisis is going to hit Europe. And in about 6 weeks, it would hit us. And so since the Hormuz Strait doesn't look like opening right now, the possibilities are a little bit mind-boggling as to exactly what's going to happen, which is why I say I think it's going to be a year of panics. And this is an excellent time for everyone to think about how they can cultivate resilience for themselves and their families. We can talk more about how to do that, but I think that's something that everyone at this point should really be focusing on, because maybe it'll all blow over and there won't be any dire consequences. But if you're buying insurance, you're not going to bet on that.
Right. No, that's actually well said. And then, actually with a lot of these things going on too, with like any sort of like ecological, environmental damages and stuff like that, or, you sink an oil ship in the Hormuz, the oil goes into the water, and that's going to be catastrophic. At least
it's already a fragile ecosystem. So yeah, that would be serious. The more immediate danger, I don't think anyone wants to sink an oil tanker. Oh, but the United States keeps threatening to attack Iranian energy infrastructure
and bridges
and Iran's, of course, threat, in order to prevent that from happening, is that they will immediately retaliate by destroying the energy infrastructure in the Gulf state countries that are hosting the American forces that are attacking them. You can argue about the legality of that, but Iran has a point. This is where the attack is coming from. We're going to fight back there.
Right.
But the Gulf states depend critically upon that energy infrastructure. Without it, they have no AC. And the temperature in about 4 weeks is going to be over 40 degrees centigrade, nearly 100 degrees Fahrenheit, constantly throughout the Gulf. So you've got hundreds of thousands, millions of people who simply won't be able to stay there if that happens. Not to mention the fact that, of course, at that point, you've shut in probably 30 or 40% of the Earth's energy supply for years, which means widespread collapse if that occurs. The United States is in an awful position right now, because it's impossible to admit defeat, and it's impossible to achieve victory except at the cost of destroying everything.
Right. Yeah, that's not a good scenario. Well, okay. I mean, do you think at all, like on a positive side, that maybe this might push nations, governments, industries, markets to like go towards like more alternative sources of energy? Like I posted when the whole thing first started in Iran, like, you know what energy sources don't get affected by war and international conflict, solar, air, hydro, stuff like that. I mean, this depend. I wonder if people are seeing this as like, look, our dependency on oil is now showing to have another really serious disadvantage, and that is when things go bad elsewhere, it just whacks us into higher costs and like all sorts of other problems. Whereas if we had like, hydro, whatever, or thermal, geo, or whatever, air or solar, that wouldn't happen, or happen maybe at a very, very less effect, if at all.
So let's talk about energy for a minute.
Okay.
I wish that was true.
Okay.
I've seen those memes all over the place.
Sure.
Right. I wish it were true that, without oil, we could just get by on solar and electricity, and then they could shut in the Gulf, and who would care?
Right.
But let's back up for a second.
Okay.
Let's talk about windmills first.
Okay.
The windmills they use to produce meaningful amounts of electricity, those are huge, aren't they?
They're I know there's a bunch here in Illinois. No, you go,
Enormous
there's
big
fields
things,
of them.
huge
Yes.
big things. How much concrete does it take to build the foundation?
Right. No, I get you.
What kind of energy do you need to make the concrete?
Right.
You need fossil fuels.
Right.
They're made out of a whole lot of steel goes into those.
Mm-hmm.
Can you make steel with electricity? Not the kind of steel they need, and not at scale. It has to be done with fossil fuel.
Right.
So you shut in the fossil fuel, how many windmills are you going to make? None.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
How many solar panels are you going to make?
Right.
Again, for similar reasons, you're not going to make any. And none of those things last forever. The first generation windmills are already reaching end of life and have to be replaced.
Wow.
Solar panels last for, you get 80% of what you originally got out of them after 10 or 15, maybe 20 years, and then they have to be replaced. And they're very, very hard to recycle. Same with the windmills. They just have to kind of bury them. It's very difficult to dispose of those things.
Interesting.
People have this idea that we can transition to renewables and leave fossil fuels behind. But if we were to do that, it would be the first time in the history of the human species that a new energy source simply came along and supplanted an old energy source. What has actually happened? Think about it. We've transitioned from biofuels, right, before 1800, a little bit of wind, but mostly biofuels.
Mm-hmm.
Grain for the animals and wood for the fires. We transitioned to coal. Now, here's a question for you. After we discovered coal, did we burn more wood than we had before or less wood than we had before?
Well, I think it sounds like the answer is going to be more.
That's the thing.
Okay.
We burned a lot more wood
Okay.
on coal than we burned before we found coal. Now, you think that's counterintuitive. Why is that?
Right.
The reason is because coal made it possible to build the machines that made it easier to burn wood.
Ooh, okay.
Suddenly, burning wood got cheaper because you had coal to do certain things that you couldn't do before.
Right.
Now, here's the next question. After we transitioned to an oil economy, did we dig up and burn more coal after that or less coal after that?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with more.
We burned up a whole lot more coal. Think about mountaintop removal mining, right?
Yeah, sure.
Oil made it possible to extract more coal, so we did. So what so far over the course of the last 20 years, as the renewables have come along, have we used more oil or less oil as they've been added to the mix? We've used more oil, right? It has simply become an additional input to a machine that doesn't care what kind of energy you give it, provided it can use it to run an economy.
Right.
And consequently, the idea that we'll just start using renewables and stop using oil is kind of naive.
Okay.
If there were a dictator of the world who could tell everybody what to do, maybe that dictator of the world could say, we're not getting oil out of the ground anymore, we're just using renewables. But there is no dictator of the world. There's just 8 billion people who have a society on top of which is built an economy that is not planned, was not designed. It just arose as an emergent property out of human society.
Right.
And like any dissipative system, it looks to burn up as much energy as quickly as possible because that's how you grow. And that's what dissipative systems try to do. Right?
Yep.
So I see a lot of stuff about, well, this would just encourage us to do more renewables. And maybe it will, but that's not going to solve the problem. Right? And that's leaving aside the notion that you can run the same economy we have now on diffuse sources of energy, sunlight and wind, that you can on highly concentrated sources of energy like petroleum. It's almost certain that that's not possible. It's not to say that you can't have a civilization built on solar and wind. You certainly can. In fact, we're used to for most of human history.
Right.
It's just not this civilization, right? Because this civilization was designed to run on petroleum and coal, on fossil fuels. It'll have to be some other civilization. And you can't just come along and decide to change it from one to the other because nobody designed this civilization to begin with, right? It's just a thing that happens.
Yes.
So it's not.
It happened very organically with the Industrial Revolution and stuff. Like you said, there was no puppeteering already, commanding of centralized command center that's like, okay, let's do this, let's do that, you do this, you do that, and it will be all like lovely and efficient and beautiful, and everybody will live in harmony and peace. No, that didn't happen. That's interesting. For sure. And, that's why I love talking to you, is like, you really point out like the nuances and like, what people are not seeing on the periphery. Like, well, this is connected to this and that's connected to this. And like, people don't think in that sort of like depth or complexity. So that's why I really enjoy talking to you, because you very much do. I mean, well, you have a PhD in mathematics, and you probably can't not do it anymore. Okay. I understand that point, but what about like there's people talking about like the fertilizer and stuff like that, and what kind of effects do you, positive or negative, I guess, just to cover it all, might that have on agriculture?
Well, it's going to have a devastating effect on food prices.
Okay.
If you look at the history of social disruptions and political crises where there were revolutions and old regimes were overthrown and new regimes came along, what was the precipitating factor in most of those cases? There were, no single cause for any of them. There were a lot of different things feeding into them, right? New ideas and different kinds of political and social movements going on. But the single common precipitating factor you'll find virtually in all of them is a food crisis. The most recent one we saw was what's called the Arab Spring, which coincided with the civil war in Syria. Both of those were caused by food crises, right? A sudden rise in the cost of food, and people were hungry. And nothing motivates someone like the fact that they can't feed their crying child.
Yeah.
That is an extremely strong motivator.
Yeah.
And they will do virtually anything, and they won't behave well, right? People who ordinarily would behave very well, be law-abiding, care about other people, get them hungry enough, they don't care.
Yeah,
they will do whatever they have to do. So we've got 50% of the world's supply of fertilizer, and we should back up. You're saying, why is our fertilizer coming out of the Middle East? I mean, what do? Dig it out of the sand? No. So there are three macro inputs to agriculture, growing plants. Plants need a whole lot of little things, but they need three big things.
Yeah.
They need nitrogen, they need phosphorus, and they need potassium.
Yes.
And especially for things like grain, rice, corn, maize, and wheat, which used to be called corn before we had maize. Those three things take a lot of nitrogen. And back in the day, in the 19th century, 18th century, one of the things that made the U.S. Navy was its ability to go around the world and go to these tropical islands that had these big caves full of millions of bats and dig out mass quantities of bat guano and ship it back home, because that was nitrogen. And that made it possible to grow food in large quantities, right? So a lot of people have heard of Malthus. Thomas Malthus, he pointed out.
Malthusianism?
Yep. Yeah, and that's what Malthusianism is named after him. And he pointed out in the 1800s that, given the technology as it was understood at his time,
right.
Population's growing geometrically. You can't get food growth to grow geometrically because you don't have the inputs for it. That means there's always going to be famines. What prevented his prediction from coming true? It's not that he was wrong or stupid. He didn't know that you could manufacture nitrogen. And how do we manufacture nitrogen? Well, we make it out of natural gas. We make it out of the natural gas that we find in the ground when we go hunting for petroleum. And it's done using what's called the Haber-Bosch process, invented by a couple of German guys, Haber and Bosch, about 125 years ago. So you take the natural gas, and through a chemical process, you turn it into ammonia, which is concentrated nitrogen. And that's what they ship out of the Mideast. Why does it come from the Mideast? Because they got all the natural gas. And they, right there on the spot, they turn it into ammonia, which then fills up these huge tankers, and these tankers take off and go all around the world dropping off the ammonia. When I was 14, my family sent me to live with a family friend in the summer for a few weeks. It was in Kansas. I don't know if any of your viewers have been to Kansas, you can get a picture in your mind. If you can't, someone once said that Miles Davis once went into Kansas and came out a white man. That's how boring it is.
It's pretty flat. The most exciting thing about Kansas
starts just east of Denver, and it goes all the way to Missouri, and it's just cornfields as far as the eye can see. Anyway, so someone sent me to stay with his family friend who owns several thousand acres of corn. And so here I'm a 14-year-old kid, and they're getting me up far earlier than I'm used to and don't really want to, and sending me out to work with the rest of the family and all the hired hands. And so here I am up on this huge tractor with this gigantic tank on the back of it and these things, these wings stretching out to either side with jets that they push down into the ground, and they're pushing ammonia into the soil. It's horrible. It makes your eyes burn. It stinks like mad. You know how ammonia is. I mean, just hold an open bottle of ammonia under your nose. That's the idea.
Not pleasant.
But this is how the world fertilizes its crops, is with this ammonia. Without the ammonia, without the natural gas to make the ammonia, we wouldn't have the nitrogen. The crops wouldn't go. There's no way in the world you have enough food for 8 billion people, maybe 1 billion if you're lucky. Well, we've just shut in 50% of the world's supply of nitrogen in the late winter and early spring, at the very time when the demand for nitrogen is highest in the northern hemisphere, because that's when all the crops get planted. So what do you suppose is going to happen? Well, a whole lot of crops aren't going to get grown, which means that in about 6 or 8 months, they're not going to get harvested, which means that the price for those, especially grains, especially corn, and corn is, most people hear corn, they think sweet corn that you buy in the store and grill on the grill, right? 90% of the corn we grow isn't that at all. It's not for human consumption. It's corn to grow animals. It's feed corn. It's field corn, right? Yeah. It's what we feed to the cattle and the pigs and the chickens. So everything gets affected. It's going to be an extraordinary crisis. Like I said, 2026 is going to be a year of panics, and it's very difficult to predict exactly how things will unfold. But there is absolutely no question that the disruption we're seeing to the global system right now is as severe as we have seen in our lifetimes, since World War II, I would say.
Wow.
And so what are the consequences going to be? Well, think about COVID. We didn't know what was going to happen. All of a sudden there was no toilet paper. Right. So this is much bigger in terms of disruption to the supply chains. And we just can't know what's going to occur. But the likelihood is it's going to be a whole lot of things that nobody predicted. And we need to be ready, psychologically, spiritually, but also in terms of preparing physically for it. Right?
Okay, so you mentioned
we should be doing some serious prepping, is what I'm saying. We need to build in resilience in our own lives so that we aren't in a panic along with everybody else when the consequences begin to, the chickens come home to roost.
Yeah, okay. You mentioned a little bit ago that you were going to talk about that. Could you unravel that for us? Like, what do you think people should do individually or with their families or friends or communities, whatever it may be, local communities? How do we prepare for something like this?
So community is the high order term, right? Whatever else you do, if you are embedded in a community where you have mutuality, you have trust, you have mutual aid and concern for one another, that's the first thing. I can't emphasize enough how critical that is. If you don't currently, if you're kind of a loner, if you're in a strange city, you're in a strange town, you've gone out for a job, you're at school, and you really don't know anybody, now's the time to reach out into the community and start to know people if you haven't done it already, right? There are 1,000 ways you can do that. There's church, there's school, there's community organizations, there's, if you want to find the best people who really value community, find the people who are helping, find the people who are running the food banks.
Oh, you bet.
Yeah, with the homeless shelters,
100%.
Right? We're doing those kinds of things. Those are the people you want to know and have them know you and build mutual trust. Community is the first thing. I'm very fortunate. I live in rural Virginia. I have outstanding neighbors whom I know well, and we've already got very mutual relationships going on. I help them, they help me. I'm a Catholic. I go to our local parish. We have a community there. My parish gives away hundreds of meals every month. We have
the Catholic Church excels. The Catholic Charities is actually literally the second largest charitable organization in the country, second only to federal welfare. Mm-hmm. So I would argue it's actually number one. Yeah, no.
Well, it is number one in the world.
Okay.
Globally speaking. So if you find the people who are helping, you're going to find the people who care and to whom mutuality means something. So that's, I wanted to emphasize that first. Community means a lot.
Yeah.
Loners don't fare well in crises.
True.
So the next thing is, okay, so what you have to do is run a kind of a mental exercise. So what are some of the things that could go wrong? Well, let's talk about food first. Okay. We think of grocery stores as being like warehouses full of food. They're not. Grocery stores are big display cases. The food that they're showing you has to be replenished on an ongoing basis. They actually contain, for most of the kinds of things that they sell, grocery stores have about 3 to 5 days worth of food, and that's it. So if there's a disruption, if suddenly the trucks can't run or the food isn't there to be delivered, the food in the grocery store is going to disappear within a couple of days, especially if people panic. Then it'll disappear in a couple of hours. And then there'll be no food until whenever. So what would you do then? If you're reliant upon being able to go buy food every few days in order to feed yourself, you're in an extremely vulnerable position, because that could all go away in a heartbeat. And then everyone's hungry. And remember, people don't behave well when they're hungry, right? You don't want to be around when people are starving, because they will behave very badly in order to get food, because they're trying to survive, and it's a primal instinct. Yeah. So what can you do? Well, it's actually not that difficult to begin to stockpile the kinds of foods that are easy to store, will store for a very long time, and will keep you comfortably fed. I think a very good goal for anybody who, whether they live alone or with someone or have a family, a very good goal is to try to figure out, what would I need in order to be able to feed all of us for 30 days without being able to buy any food? And have adequate nutrition, right? Because people often, they're silly. They're like, well, I'll store up a bunch of rice. Rice is cheap and it keeps forever, and I'll just store up a bunch of rice. That's great, except that rice is empty calories.
Right.
Where's your protein coming from, right? Mm-hmm. Where's your vitamin B12? Where's your iodine?
Right.
All of these things. So it calls for a little bit of research. There is a lot of good sources. Unsurprisingly, one of the best ones is the government. If you Google emergency preparedness government websites, you'll immediately get FEMA and a bunch of other stuff who say, here are the things you should have on hand. And it's just insurance. It's not because you think something bad is going to happen necessarily, but it's the same reason you buy auto insurance. It's the same reason you go get your teeth checked. Mm-hmm. You don't want an abscess, and you don't want to suddenly be liable for $500,000 worth of somebody's injuries, right? So you buy insurance. One of the ways you get insurance is by making sure that if there's a crisis, you can get by long enough for things to sort of return to normal, which, you should expect them to do. That's a reasonable thing to expect. The world doesn't end when there's a big crisis. It just gets interrupted. People don't sit on their hands. They immediately start trying to figure out how to fix things and get things going again, and they will. But in the meantime, you don't want to be in a panic. So, okay, so there's food. We can go into more detail about how to do food prep if you want. 2 more biggies. Well, 3. Okay, we talked about food. Let's talk about water. So you can live for a week without food. You're dead in 3 days without water. Interestingly, when there's a water crisis, most people don't die of thirst. They die of infection, because the first thing they do is drink water they shouldn't. Oh, okay. Right? Yeah. Heading down to the river and grabbing some water. Oh, we're good. We're solid, except you didn't think about the Giardia and the Listeria and the cholera and all the other things that are living in that water. And now you're sick in the middle of a crisis when you can't get medicine. Most people die from disease when there's a water crisis. So it's very difficult to stockpile enough water for a family to get by for a month, because we all need at least a gallon a day, right? So that's a lot of water. That's a huge amount of water. But what you can do is you can get a life straw. You can get water purification tablets, right? You can get a decent filter, so that you can ensure that the water that you do get, you can make safe. If nothing else, you can boil it. But thinking about where your water is going to come from, because the next thing we're going to talk about is electricity, right? We are so used to that hum in the background of an electrified world. You notice when there's a blackout, it's eerie how quiet it is, right? Because we've just grown so used to that electrified life. One of the things that electricity provides for most people is water, right? Without water, the pumps don't run, and you don't get water anymore, whether it's out of your well or out of the municipal system. And there's another thing that's related to that, which is the sewage. If you're like me and you have a septic, no big deal. But if you're living in town and you're on town sewer, that sewage also gets pumped. If there's a prolonged electrical outage, those pumps go down. The sewage is no longer getting pumped and it backs up. And all of a sudden, especially if you're downhill from your neighbors, the sewage is just coming right out of your toilet, right? Filling up your house. A huge health hazard. So it's a very good idea to think about, okay, what am I going to do about sanitation? And what am I going to do about fresh water? Because those are the two things that kill people the most, right? Inadequate sanitation, not keeping clean, not taking care of cuts and so on, and not having clean water to drink. So those are two things that you definitely want to be prepared for a 30-day outage on those things. So once you got food and water and everything taken care of, then you got to think about your immediate physical environment. Are you living in Chicago in the dead of winter? There's no electricity. How are you keeping warm? Right. So this is something that's very specific to where you're living. But there are a lot of ways to prepare for that. And rather than me, talk about different things a person could do, since it's different for everyone. For someone in Phoenix, it's the middle of summer and you're trying to think how to keep your house from being 120 degrees indoors, right? So there are lots of different possible scenarios you might be in. Instead, go online and look for answers, right? How do I prepare? How can I heat my home in a power outage? And be careful of all the stupid stuff. I just get so amazed. There's a lot of YouTube videos out there, and some of them are really valuable. But the fact is, there are a lot more people making YouTube videos than there are people who know what they're talking about. So you've got to be discriminating, right? It is not going to work to stick a candle under a flower pot and heat your room that way. That doesn't work.
I think I saw that video.
But there is good information out there. How can I keep warm? I mean, there are things like, first of all, seal up your house. Move everybody into the same room to sleep at night, because your body is a source of heat, right? Sure. It's 100 watt. It's a 100-watt bulb burning all the time. There's heat coming off of it. There are things you can do, but I encourage people simply to look them up, right? Look and find good information about that. Okay, so food, water, sanitation, heating and cooling. There are other things, but if you've got those things covered and you're embedded in a community where people are mutually helping one another, you've really got most of it done. There are scenarios that doesn't cover, right? A more general widespread collapse where order doesn't return. There's issues about, personal and family security. If there's a nuclear incident, there's issues about how not to die from radiation exposure. There are other things that a person can look into, but I think if you've got yourself a 30-day resilience plan in place, you should feel very good about that. And if you don't, it's not that hard to do. All the information is out there, and you don't have to do it all tomorrow, right? You can do it a little bit at a time. Oh, one other thing I did want to mention, though. We're all used to doing things with electronic transactions now, right? When was the last time you went into the grocery store and doled out a bunch of $20 bills for your groceries? Nobody does that, right?
Very infrequently, right?
Right. But if there's a prolonged power outage or a disruption to the financial system, which can happen even if there isn't a power outage, all of a sudden you go in and stick your card into the reader, and it doesn't even beep. And the clerk just says, "I'm sorry, we're not taking those, cash only." Right. So one of the other things you should probably think about doing, and it's for some people it's easier, for some people it's harder, but start dribbling a little bit of cash into a spot that you don't think about. Do it over time, right? $10 here, $20 there, but don't think about it. Let it just be there. in some private little spot until it's up to $1,000 or a couple $1,000. Some people, it might take a year or two. That's okay. But when everything goes to hell in a handbasket and you need to buy something critically important, you've got cash you can do it with. Because sometimes it will happen that that's the only way to barter, right?
What about silver and gold? Because some people say that think that, like, I have speculated, at least that in scenarios as you're describing, like American currency, typical like government currency is just going to be useless to some people, to the point where it won't be sufficient to use always. But people defer to gold and silver because it's more people are willing to accept it.
So there are some scenarios under which currency becomes worthless.
Okay.
We've seen that in the historical record. Think of Weimar Germany,
Argentina. Oh, you betcha.
Other places, right, where suddenly it's called hyperinflation, and it could happen to the dollar. In fact, at some point, it's almost certain that it will, for reasons we can go into if you like. I don't expect it, immediately or soon, but it could very well happen. So there are scenarios under which currency becomes useless, in which case all that currency you've squirreled away will be of no good to you. But that's for a different kind of problem, right? That's not a grid down financial system, broken, can't do anything but pay cash problem. That is a hyperinflation problem. So the question is, how do you prepare for a hyperinflation? And people immediately think, well, what's a good store of value? Oh, I know, precious metals, I'll buy gold. Right. But here's the thing about gold. First of all, if there is that kind of financial crisis, what's the first thing the government going to do? It's going to demand you give them all your gold. Oh. How do we know that? Because that is exactly what they have done in every past situation like that. In fact, it's happened in the United States. It happened in the Great Depression and World War II. FDR signed the law, said, you got gold at home? You're bringing it back to me. Like
when they send people around house to house and say, give me your gold? Okay, that's weird. I never heard that.
That's a real thing.
I believe you. I believe you 100%. I didn't know that.
And why do they do that? Well, because for international transactions, of course, they need the gold. They're trying to support the currency, right? So they need to back it with something. So they want all the gold. And that's exactly what they did in the Great Depression. That was one of the things FDR did. And then they put us on the gold standard for the dollar, which worked really well up until Nixon took us off in 1970 because we kind of inflated our currency a little bit. Long story, but right. So that's one problem with gold. Another problem with gold is, okay, so here you are, you've got an ounce of gold. In a hyperinflation situation, that thing is worth like $1 million. What are you going to go buy with it?
All right. Are you gonna go buy a Lamborghini, decked out? No, you're gonna go buy. You're gonna go buy a sack of potatoes,
flour and salt.
Right. You spend $1 million on a sack of
5 gallons of fresh water, maybe some medicine, and here you've got this chunk of gold. What good is it to you? None. It's of no use whatsoever. There is no system in place that allows you to liquidate that gold into something you can spend for useful things.
That's interesting. Yeah,
gold is a good investment sometimes. Anybody with a time machine wants to go back right now to 2 years ago and buy a ton of gold, right? Yeah. Sometimes it's a really good investment, but a lot of the time it isn't. And at any time, it's not something that you can use in a collapse scenario to purchase the things you need in life, right? So, yeah, that's not a solution. Imagine that it's a prolonged crisis. There's not enough food. People need food. They need medicine. They need water. What's something that you can exchange for the things you need? Well, there are a lot of things people are going to need. Salt. Salt is essential to life. If you don't have enough salt, you're going to die. Right. And salt is something that everyone needs. You might have, a lifetime supply of rice and maybe some pea protein for protein. But if you haven't got salt to put in it, you are very quickly going to find yourself without the electrolytes your body needs, and you're going to go into shock and you're going to die. So one of the things that might be handy to have around is a few pounds of salt, because people are going to need that, and you can trade it for something you need. See how that works?
Okay. Yeah.
So what to invest in for the future? Well, things that people need. People don't need gold. You can't eat it. You can't warm yourself with it. You can't drink it. It's of no value as a life thing, right? It's only of value as an investment thing if you happen to have a lot of money and want a way to preserve that money through certain kinds of crises. I don't have a lot of money, so I don't even think about that. Right? I know people who've bought gold. I'm sure they're very happy that it's, doubled, more than doubled in value in the last couple of years. But in a real crisis, it's not going to be of much use. And in a serious financial crisis, well, they don't have that gold at home in a safe. It's at a bank somewhere. And the government is going to freeze it and take it if things get serious enough. So it's of no value to them. All right? So, it all depends on what's going to happen. But if you think about it, for most of us, having precious metals or other things that are really valuable in and of themselves relative to a stable economic system are not going to be so valuable in a situation where everything is topsy-turvy and falling apart. It's not going to be very useful. What else would be really good to invest in? Well, if we have a serious collapse situation, and that's possible, what do people need? They need things repaired. They need medical attention. They need someone to teach their kids. They need someone to cook tasty meals. They need someone to fix the car. What kind of skills do you have?
No.
Do you have any of those skills? Can you grow food? Can you fix things? Right? Can you fix things? Can you help someone who's got an infection clean up that wound and stitch it up so that it doesn't get abscessed and they die of sepsis? Can you do that? Because that's an extremely valuable skill, right? So that's something else to invest in. Real life things, right? Real life things. How to be a living person in a world where you can't just hop in the car and go to the doctor's office anymore because it isn't there.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Right? You can't just go to the grocery store and buy another bag of oats because there's no oats there, or a half gallon of milk or whatever. What can you do, right? So those are good things to invest in.
Yeah, no, I like that last point about what sort of skills do you have to kind of bring to the community that's in need. It's a very good point.
And that's one of the reasons that communities are so resilient, is because you have a pool of different kinds of skills, right? Even really simple basic life, early medieval life, is still complicated enough that one person can't possibly do it.
Right.
You need a community, right? You need a whole range of skills and attitudes and possibilities and capacities in order to make even a fairly rudimentary life one that you can live.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's well said. We got about 10 minutes left here. Is there any positive?
Okay, so let's zoom the camera way back here and take a big picture view. One of the things that happens to people when we start talking about collapse is you can get really dark, right? Like, oh no, this is horrible. What am I going to do? This is awful.
Yeah.
So I'm actually rather cheerful about collapse. And it's not because I'm morbid or have a dark sense of humor, although I do have a dark sense of humor. But that's not the reason I'm cheerful about collapse, right?
Right.
It's not just the Addams Family gene. So our civilization, it's a dissipative system. Like all dissipative systems, it knows it can only do three things. It can either grow or it can collapse.
Right.
Those are the only options. There's no steady state.
It doesn't plateau or stagnate, right?
There's no steady state. And there are lots of reasons for that, and go to my videos if you want to see why.
Okay.
You can be sad about that in the same way that people are sad about the fact they have to die. But if you think about it for a minute, let's talk about life and death. You can't have one without the other.
That is true.
Right? If there were no death, there would be no life, because they're just two aspects of a single thing.
Right.
It's the way things are. It just is.
Right.
So you might say, well, it'd be nice to never die, but the consequence of that is that you're never born either. It's always a short ride. Always. And this is as true of civilizations as it is of human lives or anything else in the world, right? Nothing lasts, because nothing can last if there's going to be continual new things and new development. Life simply would be impossible. Everything would be dead if everything tried to last.
Mhm.
So civilization has to collapse. It has to end one way or another. Now, there are lots of different ways it can do that. And I cover this in, I forget which video it is, something about civilizations. But anyway, it can happen in fairly undramatic ways, or it can happen in really dramatic ways. Think about the fall of Rome or the fall of the Mayan civilization, right? Where just the complete collapse back to a much more primitive social state. But that doesn't always happen with collapse. Sometimes collapse is much more slow. In fact, the people who are in it don't even think of it as collapse. They just think, there's some hardships, but things are just changing. And then later on, there's renewal. But it has to happen. If it doesn't happen easily, it's going to happen hard. Let me say that again. If it doesn't happen in sort of nice chunks, like a stair step down, so that no single step is a sudden cliff to oblivion, then you're going to reach a point where the cliff is the only option.
Right. We
don't want that.
No, that's bad.
So when we look around and we see things are getting bad, right? I mean, we're in the early stages of World War III. We don't know if it's going to get much worse. We know how worse it could get. We are in a period of extreme social disintegration and disruption, especially in the West. And we have our own peculiar problems in the United States because we're a failing empire on top of everything else, which produces its own kinds of stressors. So you look around and you say, well, this is really bad. But you can also take the point of view of, since collapse has to happen, maybe it's good for us to go through these periodic disruptions where we have to reorganize on the basis of new realities. And if we do that periodically, that's a kind of a step down rather than that cliff. And so I look at the war in Iran and the war in Ukraine and all the other little wars going on all over the place, the genocide in Gaza and so on.
Yes.
And, they're horrifying and they're extremely dangerous. But they are also signs of reorganization. The global system is being reordered, as it was about 35 years ago with the collapse of the Soviet Union. There was a reordering, and Russia went through a very hard decade. Their population declined quite abruptly. There was financial chaos. There was social chaos. It was a very hard time for them. But they reorganized and stabilized, and now they're ascendant and probably will be for the foreseeable future for energy reasons. And people don't think about this, but what are the things the country needs? It needs energy, technology, people, and agriculture. You need all those things, right? How many countries are self-sufficient with respect to energy and technology and population and agriculture? Almost none.
Right.
But Russia is.
Really? So, I thought they had this oil thing with Europe. Maybe it's Russia to Europe and not vice versa. Maybe that's it. Okay.
Oh yeah. No. Russia was Europe's lifeline for energy.
Yeah. I think that was
until it
was one direction.
A brilliant idea to sanction their own energy supply, and now they're like, oh, we're under depression. Yeah. No. So Russia's on the ascendancy, but see, that was 35 years ago. They were a mess, a basket case, and now Russia is doing beautifully, and it's going to continue to do beautifully, probably for the foreseeable future. The United States is going through something rather like what Russia went through. It's our own version of it, and it's a little different because Russia wasn't a global. I mean, the Soviet Union wasn't a global hegemon. It was sort of was, but it was a bipolar world then. But it's been a unipolar world for the last 30 years, where we were the big guys, right? And now we're going through this collapse where that's no longer going to be true. We've got a multipolar world, and the United States is not going gentle into that good night. And so we're going to go through this hard time. But if we somehow held it together, it would only be worse later on, because the overarching cycle is one of collapse and renewal, death and rebirth. It has to happen that way. It can't be otherwise. Right. So at the same time, you're looking around and saying, things look really dire. You could also say, but in the bigger picture, maybe this is our opportunity to reorganize and to reestablish ourselves on some far better framework than being the global hegemon, because it hasn't made us very nice people, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, like, maybe we can have you back on. We could talk about the BRICS situation.
Mm-hmm.
I see, because that's I kept the whole time you were talking. I'm like, and there's the whole BRICS thing, and like that could very well be coming and undermine the world economy because of the petrodollar thing and blah blah blah. And yeah.
Well, bringing us back to where we were at the start of the talk, I mean, that's exactly what's happening right now. Is the United States has run itself into a situation, in part because we have incredibly incompetent people running the country, and I don't just mean Trump. The cognitive collapses throughout the entire institution. Trump is a symptom; he's not the cause. But we've run ourselves into a situation now where we cannot extract ourselves in a way that preserves who we were prior to this point, right? We can't beat Iran. And what we're really seeing is we can't beat the axis of Iran, China, and Russia. And they know it.
Yeah.
And they're doing everything they can to prevent it turning into a big violent showdown. But they know they're winning, and they know they're going to win. And we know that we can't win. And that is psychologically catastrophic, not just for Americans generally, but especially for our ruling class. And it's so interesting to watch. It's just amazing.
Yeah, no, it definitely keeps you on your toes, doesn't he? Very interesting. All right, well, thank you so much, Sid Smith. Thank you for coming on and talking about all this. And of course, yeah, you betcha. It's been a while, so let's try to. If you're up for it, come on again. Maybe I don't know, give it 3, 4, or 5 weeks, something like that. Yeah. And we'll see where we're at if we're still around. And you can come on and we can update everybody on what's going on and what to look for and that kind of thing. And
we'll be here. The internet might be sketchy, but we'll be here.
Okay, fair enough. Very cool. All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Let's Talk Lake County. I'm your host, David Rich. Special thanks to Sid Smith. Thank you very much, sir.
Good night,
go on YouTube and just type in "How to Enjoy the End of the World." You will find his videos. They are utterly fascinating. So, okay, good timing. You got a phone call. All right, sir. I'll see you later. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Come on.